The afternoon sun filtered through the canvas walls of the hospital tent, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Naiche stood near the window, her fingers absently tracing the beadwork on her medicine pouch, a gift from her grandmother before the old woman had been forced onto the reservation 3 winters ago. She had come to check on her younger brother, Key, who lay recovering from a fever in the corner cot. For 3 days now, she had kept vigil. 3 days of cooling his burning forehead with cloths soaked in creek water, of singing the healing songs her grandmother had taught her, of mixing remedies from the sparse herbs she could find in this barren place they now called home. The reservation land was nothing like the mountains where her people had once roamed freely, where every plant, every stream, every stone had a purpose and a spirit. Key stirred in his sleep, and Naiche moved closer, placing her hand gently on his forehead. Cooler. Finally cooler. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. That's when she heard the boots on the wooden steps outside. "I assumed we were going to be alone," she said quietly when the soldiers walked in. There were 3 of them, a young lieutenant with nervous eyes and weak-colored hair that stuck out beneath his cap, a grizzled sergeant with a scar running down his left cheek, and a medical officer carrying a black leather bag that looked worn from years of use. They stopped just inside the entrance, clearly not expecting to find anyone but the patient. The lieutenant's hand had moved instinctively toward his sidearm when he saw her, then stopped midway, embarrassment coloring his face. Naiche noticed everything. The way the sergeant's eyes swept the tent for threats, the way the doctor's gaze immediately went to her brother, the way all 3 of them seemed uncomfortable in her presence. "Miss," the lieutenant began, removing his hat and crushing it nervously in his hands. "We didn't mean to intrude. We were told the boy needed medicine." Naiche's dark eyes studied them carefully. In these uncertain times, with her people confined to the reservation and tensions running high, any encounter with soldiers could mean trouble. Just last month, a young warrior from her band had been shot for leaving the boundary lines. He'd only been hunting rabbit to feed his starving family. The soldiers had called it escape attempt. But these men seemed different somehow, uncertain, almost apologetic. She had learned to read soldiers the way her father had once taught her to read animal tracks. These were not the cruel ones, not the ones who looked at her people with hatred or disgust. These were simply men doing a job they didn't fully understand. "He is my brother," she said, moving protectively toward the cot. "The fever broke this morning." "That's good news," the medical officer said, his voice gentle. He was older than the others, perhaps 40 years, with kind eyes and silver threading through his dark beard. "But may I examine him? I have quinine if it's needed. This fever, we've seen it before. Sometimes it comes back worse the second time." For a long moment, Naiche said nothing. She thought of her grandmother's remedies, the traditional healing songs, the ways of her people that these soldiers would never understand, the sacred herbs that couldn't be found in this dry, forsaken place, the ceremonies that were now forbidden by the Indian agent. But she also thought of her brother's labored breathing in the night, his burning skin, his small body shaking with chills despite the summer heat. She thought of the other children on the reservation who had died from fevers like this, children whose parents had refused all help from the white man's medicine, clinging to the old ways even as those ways became impossible to practice in this new, confined world. "You may look," she said finally, "but I stay with him." The sergeant nodded and gestured for his companions to wait by the door while the medical officer approached. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible, and Naiche appreciated this small courtesy. She pulled a wooden stool beside her brother's cot and sat, her hand resting protectively on Key's shoulder. The doctor set his bag on the floor and knelt beside the cot. "My name is Dr. Samuel Porter," he said quietly, not looking at her, but addressing her nonetheless. "I've been with the Army for 15 years, but before that, I was a country doctor in Ohio. Treated more children than I can count." Naiche didn't respond, but she listened. The doctor's hands were gentle as he checked Key's pulse, lifted his eyelids to examine his eyes, listened to his breathing with a strange metal instrument. "How long has he been sick?" Dr. Porter asked. 3 days since the fever came," Naiche answered. "Before that, 2 days of coughing." The doctor nodded, making notes in a small journal he'd pulled from his pocket. And you've been treating him? What have you used? Naiche hesitated. The Indian agent had forbidden traditional medicine, calling it superstitious nonsense. But something in the doctor's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Willow bark tea for the fever, she said. When I could find willow. Mostly I used cool water and prayer. Willow bark, Dr. Porter repeated, a slight smile touching his lips. Salicylic acid. That's sound medicine. Better than half of what they taught me in medical school. He looked up at her then, meeting her eyes directly. Your brother is lucky to have you. The unexpected praise caught Naiche off guard. She had grown so accustomed to contempt, to being treated as ignorant or savage. That simple respect felt almost like a trick. The fever has indeed broken, the doctor said, almost to himself, returning his attention to Key. His lungs sound clear. Whatever you've been doing is working. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small brown bottle. I'll leave the quinine anyway, in case it returns. 2 drops in water, twice a day if the fever comes back. No more than that. It's powerful medicine. He set the bottle on the small table beside the cot, then reached back into his bag. And this, he said, producing a small cloth bundle, is beef broth concentrate. Mix it with hot water. He needs to rebuild his strength. Naiche stared at the offerings. Such things were precious on the reservation, where rations were always short and medicine scarce. Why? She asked simply. Dr. Porter sat back on his heels, considering the question. Because he's sick, he said finally. Because I'm a doctor. Because those are reasons enough. From the doorway, the young lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Porter, sir, we should. In a moment, Lieutenant Hayes, the doctor said, not harshly but with clear authority. He turned back to Naiche. May I ask you something? She nodded warily. There are other children sick on the reservation. I've heard reports, but the families won't let me see them. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I understand why. I understand the history, the broken promises, the reasons for distrust. But I am only a doctor. I want to help. Is there anything I could do to show them I mean no harm? Naiche studied his face for a long moment. She thought of little Mary Tolaco, burning with fever in her family's tent, of old man Geronimo's grandson, coughing blood into rags, of all the pride and fear and anger that kept her people from accepting help, even when they desperately needed it. Come. Alone, she said finally. No soldiers, no guns, and wait to be invited in. Dr. Porter nodded slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair. As the doctor packed his bag, Key stirred and opened his eyes. They were clearer than they had been in days, and when he saw the soldiers, he tried to sit up, fear flashing across his young face. Shoo! Naiche soothed him in Apache, placing a hand on his chest. They are leaving. You are safe. But Key's eyes had locked onto the sergeant, specifically onto the scar on the man's face. He was there. Key whispered in their language. At the big fight. I remember him. Naiche's blood ran cold. She looked at the sergeant with new eyes, and he seemed to understand that something had shifted in the room, though he couldn't understand the words. What is it? Dr. Porter asked, sensitive to the sudden tension. My brother says he recognizes the sergeant. Naiche said carefully. From a battle. The sergeant, whose name was Briggs, stepped forward slowly. His hand went to his scar unconsciously. The boy was at Sibicu Creek. Naiche's jaw tightened. Sibicu Creek, where her father had died, where her uncle and 3 cousins had fallen, where her people had made their last stand before surrender. I was there, Sergeant Briggs said quietly. Got this from a warrior's knife. He touched the scar. I respected that warrior. He fought for his family, for his land. He fought brave. He died, Naiche said, her voice sharp as flint. They all died. Yes, ma'am. The sergeant's face was grave. And I dream about it still. Every man I killed, I dream about. Even in war, especially in war, death matters. The young Lieutenant Hayes looked uncomfortable with his confession, but Dr. Porter was nodding. Sergeant Briggs requested transfer to the reservation service, the doctor explained. He said he wanted to protect rather than fight. Protect, Naiche repeated bitterly. Is that what you call it? Forcing us onto this land where nothing grows, where we cannot hunt or travel or live as we were meant to live. No, ma'am, Sergeant Briggs said, and his voice was heavy with something that might have been shame. I call that injustice. But I'm one soldier. I can't change policy. All I can do is try to make sure no one goes hungry on my watch. Try to make sure the rations that are promised actually arrive. Try to stand between my men and anyone who might be trigger-happy. Words, Naiche said. The white men are always good with words. You're right to doubt, Dr. Porter interjected. Words are cheap. Actions matter. He gestured to his bag. If you'll allow it, I'd like to come back. To check on your brother. To help where I can. No promises except that I'll do my best. Key tugged on Naiche's sleeve, and she leaned down so he could whisper in her ear. The one with the scar, he said in Apache. He carried me to water after the battle. When I was hurt, I remember now. He gave me water and wrapped my leg. Naiche closed her eyes. The world was so much more complicated than the stories of good and evil she had learned as a child. There were soldiers who killed without mercy, yes. But there were also men like these, imperfect, caught in a system larger than themselves, trying in small ways to be decent. You may come back, she told Dr. Porter, to check on Key. But if you wish to see the other families, I will need to speak with the elders first. I cannot promise they will agree. Fair enough, Dr. Porter said. He stood, his knees cracking slightly. We'll leave you in peace now. As they prepared to leave, Lieutenant Hayes paused at the door. He was the youngest of the three, barely 20 if Naiche had to guess, with freckles across his nose that made him look like a boy playing soldier. We're not all. He started, then stopped, struggling with words. His face reddened. Some of us are just trying to help. Some of us think what happened to your people was wrong. Then why do you wear that uniform? Naiche asked, not unkindly, but genuinely curious. Hayes looked down at his blue coat. Because I didn't know, he said finally. Back in Pennsylvania, they told us stories about savage Indians attacking innocent settlers. Told us we were bringing civilization, protection, progress. He met her eyes, and she saw genuine confusion there. But nothing I've seen here looks like those stories. It just looks like people trying to live. Families, children, people who want the same things anyone wants. And now that you know, Naiche asked, I don't know what to do with it. Hayes admitted. I signed on for 5 years. I send money home to my mother, to my sisters. I can't just leave. But I can't. He trailed off, helpless. You can be kind, Naiche said simply. When you have a choice between cruelty and kindness, you can choose kindness. That is something. Hayes nodded, looking relieved to have even this small guidance. Yes, ma'am. I can do that. After they'd gone, Naiche found herself holding the small bottle of medicine and the cloth bundle of broth concentrate, considering the strange ways the world was changing. The old ways were dying, that much was clear. Her people had been hunters, warriors, free spirits who roamed vast territories and answered to no one but the stars and the spirits. But perhaps, she thought, there might be new ways. Ways that honored the past while surviving the present. Ways that held onto the core of who they were, their language, their stories, their bonds of family and tribe, while adapting to this new reality. She sat beside her brother and began to sing softly, an old healing song her grandmother had taught her. Key's eyes fluttered open, and he smiled weakly. Will they come back? He asked. The doctor will, Naiche said. I think he means what he says. The one with the scar saved me, Key said. At Sibique Creek. I remember now. Father was already dead. I was lying in the dirt with the arrow in my leg, and I thought I would die too. But he picked me up and carried me to water. He pulled the arrow out and wrapped my leg with cloth from his own shirt. Naiche felt her throat tighten. You never told me. I was ashamed, Key admitted, that a soldier showed me mercy. I thought it meant I was weak, that I should have fought him. No, Naiche said firmly. It means he was human, and so are you. There's no shame in that. Outside the tent, the sound of bootsteps faded into the distance, and Naiche wondered what tomorrow would bring. More hardship, certainly. More loss. More struggles to maintain their identity in a world determined to erase it. But perhaps, also, unexpected moments of grace. Small kindnesses from unexpected places, singing the healing song, the possibility that understanding set over the reservation, even in the most barren soil, shades of orange and purple. She allowed herself to hope, just a little, that her brother might grow up in a world slightly better than this one. Even if she had helped build that world herself, one small moment of bridge building at a time. Dr. Porter returned 3 days later, as promised. This time he came alone, on foot, with no weapon visible. Naiche watched him approach from the doorway of her family's tent, a permanent structure of canvas and wood, better than some, but still a far cry from the traditional wickiups her people had once built and abandoned as they moved with the seasons. He stopped 10 feet away and waited. Naiche appreciated this. She let him stand there for a full minute, a small test of patience and respect. He didn't fidget, didn't call out, didn't demand entry. He simply waited. "You may come," she said finally. He was sitting up now, color returning to his cheeks. When he saw the doctor, he smiled, a child's simple gratitude toward someone who had helped him. "You look much better," Dr. Porter said, genuine pleasure in his voice. He examined Key quickly, efficiently. "The lungs are clear. Good appetite." He ate all the broth, Naiche said, and asked for more. "Excellent." The doctor reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 wrapped hard candies. "For the patient, if his sister approves." Naiche nodded, and Key's face lit up. Such small luxuries were rare on the reservation. "I was hoping," Dr. Porter said carefully, "that you might introduce me to some of the other families, if the elders have considered my request." Naiche had indeed spoken with the elders, the old men and women who held what remained of authority among her people. The discussion had been long and heated. Some, like old Cochillo, had refused outright. "Better to die by disease than to accept help from those who destroyed us," he had said. But others, like her grandmother Desba, had been more pragmatic. "Our children are dying," Desba had said quietly. "Pride is a luxury the dead cannot afford." In the end, they had reached a compromise. Dr. Porter would be allowed to treat those who requested it, but he would respect anyone's refusal without argument or judgment. "3 families have agreed to see you," Naiche told him. "But you must understand, if they ask you to leave, you leave. No questions, no arguments." "Understood," Dr. Porter said immediately. Naiche led him through the reservation, past rows of tents and rough wooden structures. Children stopped their play to stare. Women paused in their washing. Men watched with suspicious eyes from where they sat in the shade, whittling wood or repairing tools. The first family was the Cheese, whose youngest daughter had a persistent cough. Mrs. Chi stood in her doorway, arms crossed, clearly uncertain. But when Naiche spoke to her in Apache, explaining that this doctor had helped Key, that he came in peace, the woman slowly nodded. Dr. Porter examined the little girl. She was perhaps 4 years old, big brown eyes watching him fearfully. He was gentle, making no sudden moves, humming softly as he listened to her breathing. "It's in her chest," he said to Mrs. Chi through Naiche's translation. "Not too deep yet, but it needs treatment. I have medicine." He pulled out a bottle. 2 spoonfuls, morning and night. "And keep her warm, even though it's summer. The cough makes her weak to temperature changes." Mrs. Chi accepted the medicine hesitantly, as if it might burn her hands. "One more thing," Dr. Porter added, and he pulled from his bag a small carved wooden horse, clearly whittled by his own hand. "For being brave," he said to the little girl directly, even though she couldn't understand his words. She took the toy with a shy smile. They visited 2 more families that afternoon. Each time, Dr. Porter was patient, respectful, and genuinely helpful. He never pushed, never preached, never treated Naiche's people as ignorant or inferior. When an old woman mentioned using sage smoke for respiratory problems, he nodded seriously and said, "The smoke helps open the airways." That's good thinking. By the time the sun was setting, something had shifted subtly in the air. People were still watching Dr. Porter, but with less hostility and more curiosity. As Naiche walked him back to the edge of the reservation, Dr. Porter spoke quietly. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me this chance. I know what it cost you politically to vouch for me." "Don't make me regret it," Naiche replied. "I'll do my best," he promised. Then, hesitantly, "May I ask you something personal?" Naiche raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Your English is excellent. Where did you learn?" "Missionary school," Naiche said, her voice flat. "They took me when I was 7, kept me for 4 years, cut my hair, beat me when I spoke Apache, told me my people's ways were devil worship." She met his eyes. "So yes, I speak English. I read English. I write English. I learned your history, your literature, your religion, and I learned that knowing the enemy's language is the only way to survive in the enemy's world." Dr. Porter winced. "I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened to you. To any child." "Sorry doesn't give me back those years," Naiche said. "But," she paused, considering, "I am not sorry I learned. Knowledge is power, even when it comes wrapped in cruelty. I can read the treaties now. I can understand when the agents lie. I can speak for my people when they deal with your government. That is worth something." "More than something," Dr. Porter said. "Your people are lucky to have you." Naiche didn't respond to that. Luck seemed like the wrong word for everything her life had become. The weeks passed, and Dr. Porter became a regular presence on the reservation. He came twice a week, always alone, always patient. Gradually, more families began to accept his help. He treated fevers and coughs, set broken bones, delivered babies, and did all of it with a respect that slowly eroded the deepest layers of distrust. But it wasn't all smooth. There were incidents, like when Private Morrison, a soldier Naiche didn't know, struck a young Apache man for insolence. Dr. Porter had gone directly to the commander and filed a complaint. Morrison was transferred within the week. Or when the rations promised by the Indian agent failed to arrive for the 3rd month in a row, and people began to go hungry. Dr. Porter had written letters, many letters, to authorities in Washington, documenting the corruption and neglect. Nothing changed, but the fact that he tried mattered. Lieutenant Hayes also became a more frequent visitor, often accompanying the doctor. Unlike the older man, Hayes was awkward, clumsy with his good intentions. But he was earnest, and that counted for something. He learned a few words of Apache, badly pronounced but appreciated nonetheless. He helped repair roofs damaged in storms. He shared tobacco with the old men and didn't seem offended when they only grunted in response. Even Sergeant Briggs, the scarred veteran, found his role. He became the unofficial guardian of the supply depot, making sure the rations were distributed fairly, that no one skimmed off the top. He was stern, sometimes harsh, but scrupulously honest. People began to trust that when he said rations would arrive, they would arrive. One evening, as summer faded toward autumn, Naiche found herself sitting outside her tent with her grandmother Desba. The old woman was working on a basket, her gnarled fingers still surprisingly nimble with the weaving. "You spend much time with the doctor," Desba observed in Apache, her tone neutral. "He helps our people." Naiche replied carefully. "Yes, but there is something else too." Desba's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp, fixed on her granddaughter. "You are teaching him our ways. He is teaching you his. This is how worlds change." Naiche was quiet for a moment. "Is that good or bad, grandmother?" "Neither. Both." Desba's fingers continued their rhythmic weaving. "The world we knew is gone. The buffalo are gone. The free mountains are gone. Our warriors are gone or old or broken. We cannot bring that world back, no matter how much we wish it." She paused. "But we are still here. Our language is still here. Our stories are still here. The question is not whether we will change. We must change to survive. The question is whether we will change and still remain Apache." "And will we?" Naiche asked softly. "That depends on people like you," Desba said. "You walk between two worlds. You speak two languages. You understand both sides. People like you will decide what we keep and what we let go. Choose wisely, granddaughter." The weight of that responsibility settled on Naiche's shoulders like a physical thing. She thought of Key, growing up in this strange new world. She thought of all the children who would never know the freedom their grandparents had known. What future would she help build for them? As if sensing her thoughts, Dr. Porter appeared at the edge of camp. Naiche raised a hand in greeting, and he approached slowly, respectfully. "Good evening, Mrs. Desba," he said, having learned the proper greeting. Desba nodded regally, still weaving. "Sit, doctor," she said in English, one of perhaps 20 words she knew in the language. "You work too much. Sit." Dr. Porter smiled and lowered himself to the ground with a tired grunt. "You're probably right." He watched her weaving for a moment. "That's beautiful work." "Old skill," Desba said. "From my grandmother's grandmother. I teach Naiche. She will teach her daughters." "That's important," Dr. Porter said seriously. "Keeping the skills, the knowledge. It would be a tragedy to lose them." Desba fixed him with those sharp old eyes. "You think this? Many white men say our ways are savage, primitive." "Many white men are fools," Dr. Porter replied, and Naiche translated, which made Desba chuckle. "I am a doctor," Dr. Porter continued. "I know about healing. But every culture has knowledge about healing. Different plants, different techniques, different understandings of how the body and spirit connect. To dismiss any of that knowledge is not just arrogant, it's wasteful." He gestured to the basket. "Same with craftsmanship, with art, with the 1,000 other skills your people have developed over generations. These things have value. They should be preserved." Desba studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You are better than most," she said. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. But still white, so still a little stupid. Dr. Porter laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. "That's fair. That's more than fair." They sat together as the sun set, 3 people from vastly different worlds, finding a moment of unexpected peace in the gathering darkness. And Naiche thought that perhaps this was what the future looked like. Not perfect, not without pain or loss, but containing possibilities for understanding that had not existed before. It wasn't the future her father had fought for, but it might be the best future available. And sometimes, survival meant taking what you could get and building something new from the broken pieces of what was lost. The basket took shape between Desba's skilled fingers, each strand woven carefully into place, creating something strong and beautiful from individual reeds that alone would be fragile. Perhaps, Naiche thought, that was the lesson. Perhaps that was how her people would survive, by weaving together the old and the new, the traditional and the adapted, creating something that honored the past while making space for the future. "I assumed we were going to be alone," she had said when the soldiers walked in. But she was learning that no one was truly alone. For better and worse, all their fates were woven together now, like the strands of her grandmother's basket. The work was to make that weaving as strong and beautiful as possible, despite everything.